So, of course, I'd like to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we are discussing drawing tips and tricks in Onshape. So, we're really going to focus on a lot of kind of miscellaneous tips and tricks that I have for really getting production grade drawings in Onshape. And so, the idea behind this webinar is really just to address those questions that you may have after you spent a few hours in Onshape drawings. Really not intended to be an introduction to Onshape drawings. We're not going to go over so much the inserting of views and dimensions, but some of the more advanced questions that I get asked regarding drawings. So I'd like to treat this like a frequently asked question and answer session. And as I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions section in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question you'd like, and I'll do my best to stop and answer them. A lot of the details of this webinar come from questions that we've gotten in past webinars. So we really encourage you to ask them. They help us not only drive the content in this webinar, but future webinars as well. All right, so let's dig into it. The agenda today is very simple. As I mentioned before, I really wanted to treat this kind of as a frequently asked question and answer session. And so I'd like to address a lot of those questions that get asked about Onshape drawings after the initial first use. After you first created your drawing, how do I do this? How do I create templates? How do I link notes to items in the bill of material? Those more advanced type questions. The agenda is really just to discuss drawing tips and tricks and try and address all those questions that have come up regarding drawings from those that are still getting their first production drawings out the door. Of course, and then we're going to get into how it's done in Onshape. I'm going to go over each one of these examples, these questions that I get asked. How do we do that in Onshape? And what does that process look like? Question: anything you could cover about easy ways to get SolidWorks templates into Onshape would be sweet. I don't want to redraw old templates line by line. I will give you a potential workflow that you could try for bringing that template right into Onshape. So I will cover that later on in the webinar. It'll be one of the last things we cover. And of course, I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have. So type in any questions that you have in the questions section in the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so enough of that. Let's jump right into this. All right, so I want to start with the basics. And one of the first questions I get asked is, what's the easiest way to create a drawing? And I know that there are a lot of users out there that go to the plus icon in the bottom left corner and they click create drawing and then they choose their template. But it's a little known tip, a little known trick that I can give you is you can right click on almost anything in Onshape and choose to create a drawing of that thing. So if I right click an assembly tab, for instance, there's a create drawing of and then the assembly name. If I right click a part in a part studio, there's a create drawing of and then that part studio name. And essentially it's just a shortcut to creating a drawing of whatever it is that you're right clicking on. And it's faster oftentimes to getting to that drawing creation process than clicking the plus icon. So it's one of the first tips. If you've created your first drawings, you'll know you can go to the plus icon in the bottom left corner, but not many users know you can also right click parts or assemblies and you'll have this option to create drawing of. Now, one big benefit of doing this is that it populates the 4 views option when you go to choose your template. And it's one of the more common questions I get asked is there a way to automatically insert front, top, right, and isometric views and just automate that process? And the answer is yes. If you right click a part or an assembly and you choose create drawing of, like we just mentioned, you have an option when choosing a template for 4 views. And that will automatically insert the front, the top, the right, depending on the template that you choose and the orientation and so on. It will automatically insert those default orthogonal views. And that's a question that I get asked quite often. So let's jump into this real quickly here. In this case, let's say, for instance, that I'm in my assembly and I wanted to create a drawing of that assembly. I can easily right-click, and you'll see the option Create Drawing Of. Now, you'll see it when I right-click the tab. You'll see it when I right-click an individual part within the assembly. Same goes if I right-click a part in the Part Studio. You'll see Create Drawing Of. So again, it's just a faster approach than going down to the plus icon and then choosing what you want to insert. When you do it this way, when I right click a part or an assembly and I say create drawing of, it brings up the same template selection options that you're used to that you'd get if you went to the plus icon, but the option for 4 views is now usable, right? If this is because it has a reference to create those 4 drawing views. So again, if you're interested in automatically populating the drawing with your standard orthogonal views, you can choose the 4 views option if you do the right click create drawing of. If you just go to the plus icon, create drawing, this is not selectable because it doesn't have a reference for what the drawing is going to be pulling from. So that's one of my first tips. Again, right click, create drawing of, just a faster way to get to the template selection. It knows what the reference is going to be, so you don't have to hunt through the insert dialog to find that. It's just in general a little bit faster. All right, bear with me for a second here. Question. I would really like to be able to change the font or font size on detail view labels. Is there a way to do this? Or maybe the text bold? There are ways to manipulate the text. I'll need to go into the specifics. Give me a second here to go into the drawing properties flyout, and I'll show you where you can adjust text. Now, whether the font size differs between like detail view labels and section view labels, for instance, and I'm not sure if it's that granular, but we'll see. We'll go into that in just a moment. Is there a way to dimension between a sketch line and a line in a drawing view? I need a dimension between the horizontal tangent of a radius and an edge of my part. You can insert sketches into the drawing view, and they are referenceable as selectable as dimensions, for instance. So I will show you that in just a moment. Can you add adhesives, thread locker, etc. to the bottom of the assembly drawing? No, not as of today, right? Comment. No one uses auto 4 views method to start a drawing, and only used in demo to impress management. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that we've heard from quite a few that do like it, though I understand the sentiment. All right, so that's my first tip for you. Right-click, create drawing of. Right. All right, so the next tip that I have for you is the Sheets Flyout. This is something that's actually changed just a bit recently, but it's one of the more common questions I get from a user after they've created their first few drawings. How do I create multiple sheets in a drawing? Do I have to have multiple tabs for every drawing in my document? The short answer is no. You can have one drawing that has multiple sheets, and the way you access those sheets is via the Sheets Flyout. Now, the Sheets Flyout has some unique things that you can do. It allows you to see the reference of whatever that sheet is. Remember, sheets are independent, so each sheet has its own reference, whether that be the top-level assembly or parts within it or subassembly. Sheets have their own independent references. You can see them when you start to expand out each of the sheets in the Sheets Flyout. But one of the unique things about this is you can reorder the sheets. You can move drawing views from one sheet to another from within the Sheets Flyout. So it has some unique functionality that allows you to do, if I wanted to move one view to another and so on, I can easily, one view from one sheet to another, I can easily drag and drop it, right? So Sheets Flyout, again, the big question that I get asked is, do I have to have multiple drawing tabs for each drawing? The answer is no. You would have multiple sheets per drawing tab. And it also gives you a breakdown of the independent views in each sheet and what they're referencing, right? Will there eventually be a centerline tool for holes? I believe there's a way to do centerlines today by selecting 2 edges of a hole, but it's not. I suspect what you're asking is an automated way to drop in centerlines for every single hole. If you haven't already, definitely request that improvement. We have the ability to, of course, select edges and insert a center line. But if you're asking, can we automatically insert center lines for all holes? I would use the feedback tool and definitely submit a feedback ticket. Is there a way to introduce more than one part into the same drawing? Sure. In your insert dialog, you can go to insert another part, right? So if I go to insert, click the browse here, I can browse to another part studio and insert a view from a different part into this sheet. Sure. Right. More than one part, it could be an assembly and another part. It just depends on the scenario. But absolutely, just go back to the insert option, right? Insert dialog and choose the assembly. How do you set the view scale before inserting a view? A view is dependent on the sheet scale. So the sheet has a default scale, and that can be decided in your template. And that's what it's inserted as by default. You can right-click the view after it's been inserted and manually adjust the scale in the view properties. How do you do assembly exploded view? And that's just this. There is no dedicated explode function in Onshape. All we did in this example is just copy the assembly, delete the mates, and manually grab the parts and drag them with the tryout. So that's how you see the exploded view that was created here. All right, so my next big topic, as I mentioned, was Sheets Flyout. Now, one thing that's changed about the Sheets Flyout that I want to stress is it's no longer in the toolbar. That's something that's changed in the last month and a half or so. Just keep in mind that there's now a Flyout icon on the left-hand side of the drawing. That's how you access your Sheets Flyout, and I can go in and change or see the individual views, the references, and so on, right? Just expanding out each. As I mentioned before, you can even take views from one and drag them into another, and you can even reorder the sheets by dragging them. Now, keep in mind the selections are just like selections in a sketch. It's constant. So if I select multiple sheets, I'm dragging multiple. But I can easily drag one down and reorder it, or drag it back up and reorder it. I can also right-click, move up, move down. Right, that's another option, as well as rename, delete, go to the sheet properties of an individual sheet. All of those things are available when I right-click on a sheet in the Sheets file. Another question, of course, how do I create a new sheet? You'll see the Insert Sheet icon here, right? Why do I need to see the view reference info in the sheet list? Isn't this a view property? Having it appear in the sheet list makes navigation using the sheet list cumbersome. I don't agree. I don't agree. In this case, you'd have to know whether it's the assembly you're referencing or a part within the assembly that you're referencing, and that is related to the entire sheet. Today, that's not a view-specific thing. So that's an important thing to understand. The reference for any sheet is at that sheet level, not individual view level, right? Will you make Explode View available soon? We are, taking a number of tickets regarding Explode, so definitely use the feedback tool and let us know. We depend all future updates are dependent on the number of feedback we get. So please use that. When editing, and that's the same question by the way. When will Explode View be added? Please use the feedback tool and let us know. I know many of you already have. If you have, thank you. We are definitely aware of it. As of today, again, you would just duplicate the assembly, delete the mates, and then grab and drag with the triad. When editing a drawing view template and using form reference text box, is there a way to see which individual property is being referenced? There seems to be no reveal. Bear with me for a moment. I'm going to go over editing the properties of a note. I'm not sure that we're talking about the same thing though. So bear with me. If I don't answer that, please bring it up again. All right, so that is the sheets flyout. Again, the big thing I want to stress is A, you can have multiple sheets in a drawing. I know that's a question that comes up often. And B, it's now accessed via the flyout on the left, right? It's no longer in the toolbar. You can also do the things I mentioned, view the references, move views from one sheet to another, and so on. All right, so now let's get into the next important question that I get asked often. And this is really actually a series of questions, and it's really related to the properties of the drawing and an individual drawing level basis, right? How do I change the size of text? How do I change the units or the precision of the decimal places, the number of decimal places in my drawing? Or How do I change the line thickness of a drawing? Or how do I change the color of all my dimensions, for instance? Those kinds of detail level questions with regards to views, to annotations, to the title block, they're all accessed via a drawing properties flyout. Right. This is something that it's, again, relatively new, a few weeks old now, is this flyout, and it allows you to adjust those things independently. So you can change the line thickness, you can change the font style for dimensions or the color of dimensions and so on from this drawing properties flyout. Now you'll find it on the far right side of the interface, right? So if we jump back into our drawing, on the far right side, you'll find drawing properties, right? It's now a flyout on the right side. And the important thing to stress about this is there are tabs across the top for all the various things that you can adjust. So the units of precision, another question. How do I change the units? How do I change the precision of the decimal places and so on? That's all under units and precision tab, right? And then I go to dimensions, where I can change the dimension font, the height of the dimension, right? The size of the dimension, what color are the dimensions, what are the gap and extension options that I'd want to set for the dimensions. Then notes, right? What is the text height? What are the callout sizes? What are the colors of the callouts? Datums. If I wanted different colored datums, that's another question that comes up. You can do that, right? All of these are kind of independently configurable options within the drawing properties, right? Then we get into views. Another question I'm going to cover in just a minute. How do we change the line thickness? That's option under views. Same goes for construction geometry. You can tailor the thickness or the color of construction geometry of your drawing. And then the format, right? Things like the title block. Is it locked or unlocked? What is the color of the border frame or the details of the border zones? You can adjust all of those. So these are the individual drawing properties, and they answer a lot of questions that I get asked. I just wanted to kind of lump them all together because they're all addressable in this one piece of the interface. The question that I naturally get asked once I've shown someone this is, great, now how do I make that my default for everything going forward, right? And I'm gonna go over that in just a moment, but keep in mind the important step if you want to make sure that these are your default settings going forward is to save a template. And I'll go over that in just a moment. Can I modify a dimension on the sheet and get a not to scale underline on the dimension? It may take some manual modification. I think so, but let me try. Bear with me. Stick around for the end. You can manually type information in for a dimension. The question would be, can I get that to also be underlined? And that I'd have to try. So bear with me. All right, so now let's go over the next topic that I wanted to mention. This is really just a caveat of the last topic, and it's just I bring it up as a separate topic only because it gets asked so often. How do I adjust the line thickness of the views in Onshape Drawings? And it's important to understand this was not an option until as of a few weeks ago. So you couldn't do this in Onshape at the drawing level until only recently. And it's an option under the drawing properties views. So under the views tab in drawing properties flyout, you have thickness as an option. And right now it's a fixed list, so you can't enter in a custom thickness, and it's metric, so you need to convert if you're using inch units. You can also change the colors, but more specifically, you can adjust the thickness of 4 different categories of edges, right? Visible edges, tangent edges, hidden edges, and then also hatch, hatch definition. So that's a commonly asked question that I wanted to make sure that I took the time to address. Just jumping back real quickly here, let's jump into a document. And as I mentioned before, jump into a view with a lot of edges here. If I go to the Views tab, very important in the Drawing Properties flyout, the visible edges you can adjust, right? So I can change the visible edges. I can change tangent edges, hidden edges, as well as any hatch lines that are displayed, right? Good question. Is there a way to get an individual note to have its own color. Everything you mentioned is for the entire drawing. Is there a way to highlight just a single text entity? I think that may be a limitation. As we mentioned, if I go to notes, it's across every. If you go to change anything in the drawing properties, it's across the entire um, drawing. So I hope that's clear. I don't know today if color is an option in the note. It's not. Yeah. So I'm fairly certain that's a limitation as of today. As well as the next question, how do we change the hatch style? There's no way today to change the hatch style. All right, so let's move on. The next one in my list is copy paste. This is a small productivity improvement that works in a number of different places, and it's very simple, easy to do. You can right click copy, right click paste, or you can use Control C, Control V, right? Or if you're on a Mac, Command C, Command V. Essentially, it's just copy and paste, but it's a very basic functions, right? So things like notes. If I want to copy and paste a note across multiple places in a drawing, or maybe across multiple sheets in a drawing, I could right-click copy, right-click paste. That would allow me to copy and paste a note. Same goes for a drawing, or a bill of materials in a drawing, right? If I wanted to copy the bill of materials and have it in multiple sheets, I could right-click copy, right-click paste, or Control C, Control V, right? So it's just a small tip that I would give you. There's no way today to copy and paste views, but you can move to, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. But other things like notes, like tables, if you need to insert the same thing in multiple sheets, you can right-click copy, right-click paste, or Control C, Control V, Command C, Command V if you're on a Mac. How can you put a variable in a dimension in place of the dimension? It is cumbersome to do so. If by variable you mean property, like a property of the thing that you're creating a drawing of, I'm going to go over that. If by variable you mean an actual part level variable that's in the feature list that's using the variable feature, there's no way to insert a variable linked in a drawing today. This is a very similar question earlier. How can I improve hatch or spacing angle of the hatch to improve drawing readability? Today, there's no way to adjust hatch, right? And that's the question that was asked earlier. How do we change the hatch style or change the adjustments to the hatch? There's no way today to modify hatch. All right, so let's go over this just briefly. I think this is relatively simple, but I do want to mention it just because I think it's important. Let's say that I create a note, right? Let's just call this copied note. And let's say that I use this note in several places. Maybe in the ability to right-click copy, right? Right-click, maybe I want a note very similar down here. Right-click and paste. It's important to keep in mind it will paste wherever your cursor is. So generally, you right-click the note, move your cursor to where you want the copy of the note, and then right-click and paste, right? Now, another tip is, I'm going to get into this in just a minute, so bear with me, is you can paste across sheets as well. So if I go into a different sheet, I can also paste that same note, right? This works also for tables. So if you have a need to have the build materials in multiple sheets in your drawing, you can just copy and paste between sheets. That's an easy way to get it into multiple. Please demonstrate measuring the angle between a part edge and a sketched line. You have to forgive me. I'm not sure I have an example. You may have to bear with me. If you stick around to the end, I will try my best to find an example where I can insert a sketch and show you that. If you haven't already, please use the feedback tool and submit a ticket. And it's important to stress that to everyone here, not only for the improvements, the things like changing the hatch or those kinds of details, but also those kinds of things. If you're having a problem measuring between an edge and a sketch line, use the feedback tool and let us know. Can you copy and paste a drawing view? No. But you can move to sheet. I'm going to go over that in just a bit. So you can drag views from one sheet to another, but it's not a copy paste. It's essentially a cut and paste, right? You're moving a view from one sheet to another. You can drag views from the sheet, flyout, or you can right click move to sheet, right? Question, is the in progress watermark embedded in the template or can it be toggled on and off? The in progress watermark that you see here is an option as a company admin. It's a part of release management. So it's only an option if you have release management on, but as a company admin, you can turn on an option to display watermark. You could see show watermark for unreleased drawings. So that is specific to release management. Important to stress that. All right, moving on. The next question that I get asked often is move to sheet. How do I move a drawing view from one sheet to the next? And it's important to understand this isn't a copy and paste. You're moving from one to the next. And one of the easiest ways is just to right click and then move to sheet, right? So when you right click an individual drawing view within the bound of the drawing view, you'll have this option to choose which sheet do you want to move this view to. So that's one of the easiest ways to move a view from one sheet to the next. It's important to understand, again, it's not a copy and paste, it's a move to. So it will be pulled out of this sheet and then moved into another. Right? All right, so that's move to sheet. That's one of the easiest ways to move a view from one to another. You can also drag a view from one sheet over into another, right? And you can see I've just inserted this view into this sheet. And I did that just by left click dragging from one sheet into the next, right? The question, will the move to sheet carry all the attached dimensions? The dimensions, yes. The notes referenced should, assuming they're attached and not just floating relative to the view. But let's try. That is a good question. I just want to try this. Bear with me for a moment here. Let's grab a view like this. All right, and we want to take this, insert it here. Yes, notes carry over as well. I wanted to test that myself, forgive me, but yes, notes will carry over, of course, the dimensions too as well. Okay, so good question. Can we move to with something dependent, like a detail view or a section view? Let's try this one more time. Yes. So the short answer is yes, you can move them, even though they have dependencies. In this case, I moved that section view. One thing to keep in mind is this may lead to a situation, and this is deliberate, of course, where you have multiple references. And it's important to stress, in the case of drawings, the first thing that's inserted into the drawing, whether it be an assembly or a part, is by default the reference for the sheet, right? So when you go to insert notes and you link to the properties, it's linked to that reference. But in this case, you can see we have two references, the exploded assembly tab and this parts area, which is the section view that I inserted. So by default, if I go to insert a note, it's going to be referencing the top level assembly because that was the first inserted, right? You can change that if you go to the sheet properties. There's a drop down where you can choose the reference, but by default, the first thing that you insert becomes the reference for that sheet. And so when you link to notes, in the properties and notes and things like that, that's where it's pulling from. And I hope that's clear. All right, so that is move to sheet. As I mentioned before, two ways. You can right-click the view, or you can drag and drop within the sheet's flyout. Moving on, the next question I get asked often is hole callouts. How do I use hole callout? Does hole callout depend on certain things? It's important to understand hole callout is dependent on using the hole feature. And so if you've used the hole feature to create holes in your parts, there's embedded data within those features. The depth of the hole, the tap information, all of that is embedded within the actual hole feature. And you can pull that information using the hole callout feature, right? So in the toolbar in the drawing level, you'd click hole callout. It's important to understand because you have to go, leave the dimension tool, the regular dimension tool, to choose hole callout and then select an edge associated with a hole created using hole feature, right? And the key here again is just the ability to pull that relevant information from the model, right? So the details of the tap drill size, for instance, or whatever it may be. So as I mentioned, it's a separate command in the toolbar. You'll see hole callout, and you select an edge referenced by or created by the hole feature, right? So if I left click, there is the hole callout, right? So that is inserting hole callouts. Important thing to stress, you must use hole feature, and you select the hole callout command from the toolbar, left click an edge of a hole that was created using hole feature, and it will drop the relevant information into a single callout, right? All right, so that one relatively straightforward, but I do get asked that question quite often. Now let's get into the bill of materials. The bill of materials is, you really have three options for how you want to insert your bill of materials. You can use the Onshape bill of materials that's automatically generated. You can use BOM data that's been synced with Onshape, for instance, like the Onshape BOM for Google Apps, right? If you're using Google Sheets to drive your bill of materials. Or you're using something like OpenBOM, an integrated bill of materials app. It depends on what you're using. But you have three options, and that's the first thing that I want to stress. By default, it will grab the Onshape assembly, but if you choose something else, it will remember that. You can choose BOM data, which is a cloud-connected app like Google Sheets, the example that you see in the App Store, or OpenBOM and the like. So, and that's using BOM apps. So, how does this work? One of the first questions that comes up is, how can I see the bill of materials before it's inserted? How can I see what it's going to look like, or the orientation of different columns and so on? It's important to understand that the bill of materials that's inserted into the drawing is exactly what you see in the simultaneous bill of materials if you're using the Onshape BOM. So by default, in every assembly in Onshape, there's this bill of materials table, Flyout. And if you left click it, it will list all the parts, the quantity, part numbers, descriptions, or any other column that you want to add, right? And you can edit the data here, right? So I can edit part number description if I want to. But it's important to stress that this is what you're seeing when you insert into the drawing. So the question then becomes, well, how do I change some of these things? What if I wanted the part number to be to the far right, or the description to be somewhere else? And you can right click here, move left, move right, to order this the way you'd like, right? But you want to get it looking correct here before you go to insert it into the drawing, right? That's the important thing I would stress. This is assuming you're not using, some other app for your bill of materials. If you're using the Onshape BOM, then just keep in mind this is what you'll see. Now we have improvements for things like views of your bill of materials that are different from the assembly and so on. And if you need that functionality, please let us know. But as of today, the important thing to stress is what you see here is what will be inserted into the drawing, right? So how does that work? Well, let's go back to our exploded view here. And what I'd like to do is insert bomb. It's its own command in the toolbar, right? You choose insert bomb, and by default, it's going to pull, from the assembly that's referenced here. But I could choose other things if I wanted to reference something else. I could choose whether I want a top level bomb, a flattened bomb, or a multi-level bomb, right? So flattened is just a list of parts. It ignores subassemblies. It's just one giant list of parts, right? Structured top level will give you a structured bill of materials with subassemblies, but it doesn't break down the parts within subassemblies. So subassemblies will be a single line item in the bill of material with no individual parts within it. And that's where structured multi-level comes in. This will give you the subassemblies and then the .1, .2, .3 nomenclature for parts within subassemblies. And that's where you get the structured multi-level. So I hope that's clear, but again, flattened, just simple list of parts. This gives you a top-level view listing subassemblies as a single line item, and then the structured multi-level breaks down subassemblies and the parts within them, right? But that's really it. Once you're satisfied with the structure, with the order, you just left-click to place the bill of materials into the drawing. Right. So that's really all you get. Again, very simple. It's just bringing that same bill of materials that you see in the assembly into the drawing. Right. Question. Unfortunately, the hole color also prints the counterboard data on the parts where the screw shaft is only the diameter seen. I believe I understand what you're saying there, and I think it's for multi-part holes. But if you haven't already, please submit that feedback ticket. You may have already. If you have, thank you. But if not, please do. I think I'm aware of another case where it's multi-part holes. Why does hole call lack all the modification features found in normal dimensions? In short, I don't know. I suspect it may be possible to allow you to adjust your whole callouts. Right now, it's a linked value to some other thing. In this case, just the metadata of the hole that you're pulling from. So it needs to update. And so it needs to be a linked property in order for you. So you can't chop up a property into multiple things when right now it's one object. I suspect that's the logic. I'm not a developer, so forgive me. But if I had to guess, that would be why. When using a hole callout for a stack of holes, hole through one piece and tapped and terminated in a second piece, the callout displayed as a hole for the wrong. This is the same question as earlier. The callout is going to be the same. So if you have a hole that goes through three different parts, and the first part's a counterboard, the second part's a clearance hole, and the last part's a tapped hole. As of today, I'm 90% certain the call is going to be exactly the same, and I think this is the comment that's being made. And if that's the case, please let us know. I think this has been reported by others. I'm fairly certain of it, but please let us know. If anything, just so that we get an accurate count of the number of affected users. But I'm fairly certain the answer to your question is yes. It's showing the same callout information regardless of what stage in the whole, which part it is, right? Yeah. So same thing. This is a specific to multi-part holes. So when you're creating a through hole, then tapped hole in multiple parts, that's where it's most applicable. How can I bring the part name into the BOM? You would do that at the assembly level. You would add column name, right? So add column name in this at the assembly level, and then when you insert it into the drawing, it will show up there. Right? Question: if you reorder the Onshape bomb columns after it's been inserted to a drawing, will it change the filter? Will it change filter through? Yeah, it should update in the same way that updating the metadata or updating the column width, those types of things. You will have to refresh to update, just like you'd have to refresh if you change dimensions. But yeah, there should be no reason why the order should not update. Can the text properties be set in templates? Yes, you can insert notes, link them to properties, and save that as a template. Can you choose which columns appear in the table on the drawing? No. And that's a good question. As of today, what you see here is what you'll insert into the bill of materials, exactly as it is. There's no way to say only show these columns when inserting into the drawing. We have gotten that request, so please, if you haven't already, submit your feedback. But as of today, no. Exactly what you see here is what's inserted into the drawing. All right, so that is the bill of materials question I wanted to make sure to answer. Now, there's a lot of subsequent questions that kind of tie into the bill of materials. The first one, inevitable one, is callouts. What about callouts? How do I link the callouts to the item numbers of bill of materials so they're parametrically linked? What if I don't want to show the item number? What if I want to show part number as my callout in my balloons? Or what if I want to show name plus quantity, is some kind of thing that I do in my bill of material or my callouts, my balloons? And all of these things are possible via the callouts command. So one of the questions that I get asked is, okay, I've inserted my BOM. How do I insert balloons that are linked to the item number? So let's get into that. Now, in this example, let's jump back to our exploded view of the assembly here. What I have is, let's delete, the bill of materials, right? That's right now using the Onshape BOM that's automatically generated. And I want to insert balloons pointing to the item numbers in the bill of materials, right? So as I mentioned before, the command you're looking for is callout. You select callout. Then you choose what it is that you want to reference. Now, I have mine set to part name. By default, it should be set to item number, right? So by default, if this is the first time that you're using this, it should be set to something that says table item number. And that is the bill of materials item number that you see in the list, which means if I left click, I get a balloon that's parametrically linked to the item number in the BOM. If I move things around in the bill of materials, this number will update when the drawing is updated, right? So that's a question that gets asked often, very simple. I want to stress when you go to create a callout, make sure it's set to table item number, and that will be linked parametrically to the item number in your bill of materials, right? So that is the first important thing to stress. When you choose callout, item number will link to the BOM, and that's what many users like to do. But what if you don't want that? What if you wanted, part number? Or what if I wanted to customize my balloons in some way? Maybe I show, part number and then quantity below or to the right or something along those lines. In the callout command, you can customize this a fair bit. There's a field on top, a field on the left, a field on the right, a field on the bottom that can all be customized. So if I wanted part number in the balloon but quantity below the balloon, I could do that, right? I could delete this field in the center and add part number, right? And then in the bottom, I could add, quantity. So I can build my own, custom kind of balloon configuration on the fly. And then from here, when you place it, you're going to see part number and quantity, right? And these options are what we call sticky in the sense that once you've changed them, they should remain at that until you change them again. So if you always are referencing balloons by part numbers, then it should stay that way, I guess is my point. Right? You shouldn't have to adjust that over and over. So that's an important caveat that I would stress about balloons or callouts more specifically, is they can be referenced to multiple things. A lot of users will just reference the item number, and that's fine. But if you have a need to reference something like, let's go in and look again, things like description or appearance, name, property, right? Or the revision. Maybe I want to show the revision as part of the balloon details. Material is another commonly asked one. So basically, just think of any type of property that you'd want to put into the callout. You can do that. There are of course details for the callout. You can have border definition. You can define a fixed number of characters that are allowed within the callout or not. The tight fit is just wraps the callout around it. And you can set font size and so on. But important thing to stress, kind of the next step after you've entered that bill of materials, Okay, now I need to have balloons, and balloons linked to the item number, or balloons linked to the part properties, or what I get asked most often, right? All right, so that is callouts, um, and they could reference any property, and you can build kind of combinations if I wanted, and I can put multiple things inside of a balloon, or I can have one property on top and one property on bottom, or one property on the left, one property on the right. How you choose to build what that looks like is up to you, but you can do that via the callout dialog. And it is parametric in the sense that if you change the metadata, if you change the quantity, if you change any of those details, the item number in the table, it will update with an update of the drawing. Right. Another question I get asked often is, with respect to callouts, let's say that I have an assembly and I call out a part within the assembly. What part? What name does it show? Does it show the assembly name or the part name? It pulls from the part level. So that's a bit different than note. Note will pull from whatever the sheet reference is. But if I do a call out and I select an edge of a part within the assembly, it will pull the part number, the part description, not the assembly number. The assembly, I hope that makes sense. It will pull from whatever it is that it's attached to, not the sheet reference. I hope that I make that clear. But I think that's an important caveat. At the assembly level, you would want, if I'm ballooning a bunch of parts, I would want to pull the part numbers of each part and not just the same part number for the assembly level all the time. All right, so question, if you delete item 6 on revision A, will the item number is greater than remaining static with a revision change, i.e. item 10 is the same item in both revisions? I believe I understand this. So just to restate it, if you delete item 6 in the bill of materials, I'm assuming on revision A, will items numbers greater than 6 remain static with the revision change? In other words, there's a blank space at 6. I suspect what would happen today is it would reorder and shift up. It would not remain static after I delete. Now, I should point out there's no way to just delete a row from the bill of materials by itself. But if I deleted parts from the assembly, that would cause the item numbers to shift, absolutely. It does not remain static. I hope that makes sense. You could reorder it afterwards, but if I deleted a bunch of parts and removed an item number that's no longer in existence, it would shift everything up, I suspect. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. There's no way to delete a column, but you can exclude things from a BOM. I should clarify that. So you can't just right-click and say delete this from the bill of materials. But you can right-click at the assembly level and say exclude from BOM. And that's an important thing to point out. So what I was thinking of here is right-click and delete a column or a row. And you can't do that. But what you can do, this is a good question, is you can right-click a part and say exclude from BOM. And that will essentially do the same thing. Right? It will remove that row. Right? All right. So let's move on to the next topic. This is another BOM-related topic. What about editing the display name for a property in my bill of materials? For instance, you have quantity. I show QTY as that's what I want the column header to be in my bill of materials. By default, it's going to spell out quantity in the column header, right? For the bill of materials that you see at the assembly level, and also for the bill of materials that's inserted into the drawing. It's going to show whatever the default name for the property is. But we did add, as of a few updates ago, the concept of a display name. So in each of the properties, you can set what's called a display name. And so essentially what you would do is, for instance, quantity, if I wanted it to show QTY rather than spelling out quantity, I'd go into the properties, find the quantity property, edit it, and change the display name. And essentially whatever you type in here becomes what's displayed as the column header in the bill of materials at the assembly level and when it's inserted into the drawing, right? So an important thing to stress, if you haven't edited custom properties before, you'll find them as an admin or owner of a company, right? So an admin or owner of a company, you have the company settings, and under properties, you can edit properties, right? So if I go into quantity, you'll see display name, right? And you can see my display name is set to QTY, which is why it shows QTY in my assembly and in the drawing. By default, it would spell out quantity. And there are a number of other situations. I can think of like part NO. That's a common thing in a lot of companies. They don't like to spell out part number. Part NO serves the same purpose. So essentially, think of any scenario where you have part number as a property, but you want to display it differently in the drawings for simplification most of the time. Most of the time, this is really about just getting the bill of materials to be as narrow as possible, to take up as less width, as possible. All right, so that is changing the display name of individual properties, right? Again, the reason you do that is so that when you go to your bill of materials, it's displayed cleanly. You can see I have QTY displayed as the column header here. All right, so next question that I get asked often, and this is specific to sheet metal, what about inserting the flat pattern of sheet metal parts into a drawing? And the short answer is yes, you can, but it's an option. It's an option you have to look for and turn on in the insert dialog. By default, it will also insert bin notes and bin lines, right? So you'll see that information by default. You can hide it, and I'll go over that in just a bit. But keep in mind, it is an option. So let's go into this. Bear with me for just a second here. Have the sketch lines and exploded views been fixed to go to and from the point selected? I'm not sure I follow what feature you're using for explode lines. We don't have a explode view function or explode line function, so it's not immediately clear what you're using. So forgive me. If you're referring to actual sketched in lines in the drawing level and then being referenced to geometry, we did add an improvement that allows you to attach, lines at the drawing level to, like sketch geometry. And that may answer your question, but forgive me, I'm not 100% sure. All right, so how do we insert a flat pattern into a drawing? In the insert dialog, when you're first initially inserting your views, there's an option here to insert flat patterns. Now, without this option checked, you won't see flat patterns as a choice when you go to insert. So it's important to point out, make sure if you're trying to insert a flat pattern that you turn flat patterns on. Now, the question came up earlier, how do I insert sketches or how do I dimension to sketches in views? Well, inserting sketches can be done here. There's an option for sketches. This just turns on the visibility of sketches as an option to insert. Then you go in and choose the individual sketch that you would want to insert. Now, in this case, I've turned on flat patterns because I want to insert a flat pattern of a sheet metal part. And I expand out one of my part studios and I see the various flat patterns of, and then whatever the part name is, right? In this case, we'll choose flat pattern of part 2, left click, move my cursor, left click, and now I've inserted a flat pattern view into my drawing. All right. Now, as I mentioned before, by default, it inserts the bin notes and the bin lines as a default behavior, right? But you can hide these things. If you right-click inside of a flat pattern view, you have hide bin lines and hide bin notes as options, and the inverse. By the way, you can show bin notes, show bin lines if they're not already shown. But that is a specific option that you only see when working with flat pattern views, right? But again, the key thing to stress about inserting flat patterns into drawings is the option here for flat patterns. By default, you won't see them in the list unless this option is on. Right? All right, so let's move on. That's inserting flat patterns. We have just a few minutes left and a few things left that I want to discuss. One question that's come up before is, how do we insert notes that are linked to properties? So that when I change the name or the description of the part number or whatever it is, the note parametrically updates. right? And this is relatively straightforward, but I do want to mention it because it's a question that comes up quite often. When you go to insert your note, right, you have this option. So if I go to note and I just click out an empty space to insert my note, in the note flyout, this dialog here, you have two options that are worth noting: insert sheet reference property and insert drawing property. Now, if you're trying to pull properties from whatever's referenced in this drawing, in this case, the top level assembly, it would be insert sheet reference property. But if I'm trying to link to things that are drawing specific properties, things like maybe drawing approval date, for instance, then I would choose insert drawing property, right? But that's really all it takes to link to the field, right, so to speak, to a property, right? And these are parametrically linked, of course. So if I, choose name, you can see it grabs the name of the assembly. Now, it's important to stress, in this case, this is in a note linked to the sheet reference property. Remember, I mentioned before, the first thing that you insert into a drawing sheet is its reference. So the assembly or the part, whatever you first inserted, that's where it's grabbing those properties from, right? So that's a question that comes up often. I just want to get it out of the way. That's where it's pulling that, right? That's what I was asking about. Set a property and then go back to try to determine what was selected. If you mouse over it, you should see a flyout that says the property name, right? So I've edited the note. I double click the note, mouse over it, and it says sheet reference name. Right? How can we import sketch dimensions into the drawing? Good question. Today we cannot. Today you insert dimensions one at a time. There's no batch insert from the model into the drawing as of today. Right. All right, so that is inserting notes and linking them more specifically to properties, whether it be sheet reference properties or the drawing properties. That's how you'll get these linked notes that you see in your title block, for example. Right? Right. I don't get the flyout, but that is an answer. If you don't see it, please let us know. It should appear just to the top right of your cursor. It's just a little blue string. I'm not sure. If you're not seeing the same thing as me, please let us know. All right, so that is linking notes to properties. All right. Now, what I'd like to get into next is dual leaders. This is another question that comes up often. I have a note, it has a leader, and I need it attached to multiple edges. A good example, I'm trying to highlight multiple faces that need to be anodized, or I need to highlight multiple edges that need to be deburred. I have one note with multiple leaders pointing to the different things that I need referenced. The key to this is the alt drag. Right? This is a tip that's useful throughout drawings. Alt drag will give you a copy. And in this case, if you alt drag the grip point of an arrow, it gives you another leader. Right? So let's jump into a quick example. Bear with me for just a moment here. Let's go into, say, for instance, this center housing. And let's say that I wanted to add a note and I reference this edge. Right? So I click here, add my point. Let's say deburr edges. Right? Okay, and so now I have a leader with one, or I have a note with one leader. But what I want is this same note pointing to two edges. So I hold Alt, grab the grip point of my arrow, that little dot at the end of the arrow, and drag it down to another point that I want to reference. By holding Alt, it will create that copy, right? That second leader, right? So that's a question I get asked often. I wanted to bring up. Just keep in mind Alt, if you hold down Alt and grab that grip point, it creates a copy. And that's useful in a number of different situations, but I think this one is one that I think is most applicable. All right, so let's move on. That's notes with dual leaders. Another one that was recently added is min-max dimensions on arcs. This is very similar to what I just showed you, except now you can grab dimensions the grip point for dimensions and move them to the minimum or maximum conditions of arcs in your drawing. In the past, these weren't selectable references. So in short, you just grab your dimension grip point, drag it to the end of an arc or circle, and it will allow you to attach it to that furthest extent, right? That's something we really didn't have in the past. It meant that if you're trying to do min-max dimensions of the outside or the inside of arcs, it could be troublesome, right? It could be somewhat difficult. But now just grab that drag point, just as I did with the arrow, grab that drag point of the dimension, and you should see the outside of arcs as a selectable option, right? Next one, custom templates. This is a question that I get asked often. I want to spend just the last minute or so here on this topic. Let's say that I've, inserted my, necessary title block information. I've linked my notes the way that I like. I've adjusted the line thickness the way that I've liked, the color of the dimensions, every detail I've gone through and adjusted. I'm starting from scratch. I want to build my own template. How do I take this default template that I've built with all the line thickness, the linked properties, and so on? How do I take that and make it a template that I can reuse? And the short answer is right-click the drawing, choose Export, choose Format as DWT, and then the option to store the file in a new tab. Essentially, this is going to take whatever drawing you're looking at. It's going to save it as a DWT file in a document, in this document, if you choose Store File in a new tab. Now, every time that you go to create a new drawing, you're going to get this template as an option, right? So important thing to stress, if it were me, I would go into a new document, create some blank drawings, set all these things up, and then export and save as DWT. The question that came up earlier, how do I take a SolidWorks template and use that in Onshape? First off, make sure to export a blank SolidWorks template as a DXF or DWG, right? Then what you can do is you can insert that DXF over the top of a blank drawing sheet, right? So when you go to create a drawing, there's an option under custom for nothing. You can include no border, no title block, and just have a blank drawing sheet. If you do this, you can insert your own DXF over the top of a blank drawing sheet and save that as a template. Make sure to set your line thickness, insert your linked properties, those kinds of things. But that's how I would take a SolidWorks template, SolidWorks drawing template, save it as DXF, and use it to build my own template in Onshape. But in short, there's a very important last step. Once you've customized the template the way you like it, you've added maybe your company logos, or you've added your linked properties, export the template, make sure to choose DWT as the format, and if you choose Store File in a new tab, that's going to save it to that document, and it will be selectable as this name, right? So that's one of the last questions I get asked often. One final thing I would mention, what about exporting? What formats do we export? What are the different import options? It's fairly straightforward. We can import DXF and DWG. And that's why I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure you translate SolidWorks drawings to one of those two formats to bring them in. We can export DXF, DWG, PDF, and DWT, of course, which is what we used here for the template. So that's the final question that I want to make sure to get to. I know I've run a few minutes long, so forgive me. One final comment I would make, if you're interested in learning more, a lot of these topics and more are covered in the Onshape Learning Center. So if you're interested, check out learn.onshape.com. There's self-paced training, instructor-led training, technical briefings, lots of great content that's worth checking out. So if you're interested in learning more, definitely the place to go. All right, I'm going to stick around and answer a few more questions. So please make sure, if I have not answered your question, to stick around and make sure to ask it. I will do my best to answer them. But that's it, everyone. Thank you, and have a good day.